somebody with you on Tuesday night, your neighbor, your brothers, your sister, your aunt, your uncles, and let them come out and to receive the liberation, to find out about themselves. Because, Chuck Gary Bird said, what you don't know will kill you. And that's a fact. Right now, we'll give this mic to our beloved brother, Professor Amos N. Wilson.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you kindly. I appreciate your cause and your welcome. And hope I did not have you waiting too long here. So I was going down the wrong direction. I'd have to sort of remind my good brother that the address is 838 East 165th Street, right? Instead of 838 Prospect Avenue. So I was headed in the right direction instinctually. Yeah. I know this neighborhood, and then I saw numbers, and I went back the other way. So then I had to come back across again. So yeah, so I noticed it is 838, but the 838 is for 165th Street. Well, I won't owe you too much here this evening, but I'm sorry we don't have a lectern, huh? No? Okay. I'm sort of more used to sort of standing, and I think, is that one? No, yeah. Okay. Okay, this evening we're going to talk a little bit, not so much directly about the mind as I'd like to, because to be honest with you, I'm sort of in the middle of trying to complete the final lecture in the upcoming book of lectures, Blueprint for Black Power. And often it's difficult when you're really concentrating and writing to sort of pull yourself out of a mode of thought and sort of move directly into another, particularly rapidly. Even though I think the things I will talk about today will have some relevance. Of course, whenever we talk about men, we talk about mind, and of course when we talk about ourselves, we talk about minds that have been transformed by our experience. I'm going to talk today a bit about what I call assimilationist fantasies, multiculturalism, racial harmony, and the future of the African American community. Thank you. Thank you very much. I see Brother yourself is here, and I had the good luck of being with him last Sunday. He'll hear a little bit of what he heard last Sunday out at the African Portrait Theater, when we talked a good deal about awakening the natural genius of black children, and where we talked a bit about fantasies. I'm going to continue to talk a little bit about that today. I tried to demonstrate in last week's lecture at the African Portrait Theater that to a good extent we are subject to several types of fantasies that have prevented us from seeing reality and from dealing with reality. I want to pay some obeisance to the day of Dr. King's assassination, sort of beginning this a little bit, and just to mention his legacy in the sense that I admired his struggle for what I might call human dignity. While there are those of us who may certainly not be in line with some of his ideological stances, I don't think we would disagree over the fact that he struggled mightily for the dignity of African people and for African American people in this country today. He struggled to reveal our humanity to ourselves and to the world, and of course to gain us certain basic citizenship rights and encourage us to stand on our feet and to demand what are human rights and to demand that we be heard and that we gain those rights that are ours as human beings, not because they're just civil rights or legal rights guaranteed by the so-called U.S. Constitution, but because they are rights that should be granted to any human being. The thing that I admire most about Dr. King, of course, is that he had the courage of his convictions. Regardless as to whether we may agree or disagree with the ideology or not, I think again we must admire the fact that here is a man who put his life on the line for what he believed. It is easy for those of us who may not agree to hide out and to talk in safe places. But the reality and the moment of truth occurs when we're willing to confront dangers and other things to try to realize our convictions. Those of us who have different ideologies from that of King then must take courage from his example, and we must then demonstrate the courage of our convictions. All too often we hear people talking about Malcolm X making some kind of change or toward the end of his life. We also get a similar bit of information about Martin Luther King. As a matter of fact, I've seen some of the later speeches that we don't hear much of that indicate very clearly that Dr. King was arriving at what I perceive as a more realistic view of the nature of this nation and the nature of this world, and perhaps again was ready to enter into a new phase of activity and to perhaps change the ideology a bit and to move toward economic and political development based more on a sense of African identity. The thing though that I'm mainly concerned with though is many of people who took from King's philosophy an ideology that I call a fantasy, what I've called the assimilationist fantasy. To a good degree, you can see the response to Dr. King's speech in Washington as indicative of the fact that he spoke to a collective fantasy, a set of dreams by our people at that time. One of the measures of fantasies is when you find a leader who is charismatic not only because he may speak well or she may speak well or has an oratorical style, but because they articulate something in the hearts and minds of the masses of the people. And the response of African Americans to King's famous speech would indicate that he articulated a fantasy that was shared by a large percentage of our population. This fantasy I've referred to as a compensatory fantasy, a fantasy that seeks to compensate for the injuries done to our collective egos as African people. We tend to think of children as being involved a great deal in fantasy, but we must recognize that fantasies are things that are with us throughout our lives, and that we, even as adults, are guided by very powerful fantasies. As I indicated before, although there are a number of types of fantasies and a number of ways fantasies serve us both positively and negatively. We're primarily concerned with what I call the compensatory fantasies, because I believe that these types of fantasies retard our growth and destroy our genius as African people. I've indicated that fantasies are perceived as what we call ego defense mechanisms in psychology. That is the means by which we try to defend ourselves against disappointment, against failure, against threat, against stress, anxiety, and fear. These emotions are highly upsetting and unpleasant, and certainly we try to bring them to an end as soon as we possibly can. We have mental means by which we try to reduce their intensity or to eliminate them, period. Some of the methods we use are methods that rely on the distortion of reality, of the denial of reality, of deceiving ourselves, or lying to ourselves, or backing back or retreating into our imagination and into dreamland, imagining the world to be what it is not, living under the influence of wishful thinking and hope, which will not see reality. This is what we mean when we talk about defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms are designed to massage our egos and to reduce the pain of our egos, but not to solve the problems which cause the pain to our egos and ourselves as people. Which means then, while we may feel no pain, the disease that is destroying us will continue to eat us alive. And ultimately we may suffer death and damnation, even though we might feel good to ourselves. Many of the remedies that we see in the drugstores and other areas are what we call pain relievers or symptomatic pain relievers. They relieve the symptoms of disease without curing the disease itself. And to a great extent then, ego defense mechanisms are pain relievers. They soothe us, but the disease and the problems that are the cause of our pain continues and ultimately may destroy us. Fantasies then are one of the major means by which we soothe our egos and the means by which we relieve our pain. We readily use ego mechanisms such as fantasies because they conveniently and often effectively soften our failures and reduce conflicting thoughts and feelings and emotions and so forth. They alleviate anxiety, and they help us to maintain our feelings of competence and worth. But as I've indicated earlier, reality continues to be what it is. I argued then in our last lecture at the African Poetry Theater that to a great extent I believe many of our people responded to the articulations of Dr. King, particularly the ones where he talked about our assimilation with white folk. When he talked about little white boys and black boys holding hands and those other fantasies, I think he spoke then to our own collective fantasies, where we assumed that we could get over our pain as a people by merging with our enemies. We, like abused children, while being abused, were made to think that our abuse was the result and is the result of our color. It is the result of who we are as people, and not the result of the insane person who is doing the abuse. When we are being abused often, those those people who abuse us seek to convince us that our pain is the result of our being different from them. And that if we were like them, if we talk like them, we look like them, dress like them, then we would not suffer. And therefore we have some people who tell themselves when they suffer from the pain of the madness and neurosis of Europeans and the sickness that Europeans represent in the world today, we hear our people saying, they did it to me because I was black. This means that we leave then those who persecute us and exploit us and hurt us in all kinds of ways to appear to be normal, innocent. It is only our skin color, our differentness, that's the cause of the problem, not their madness and not their psychopathology and their illness. And we can only think this, ladies and gentlemen. And we can recognize this when we tell ourselves we want to be just like the people who destroy us. We want our children to go to school with the people who discriminate against us, who have enslaved us, who lynch us, and do all of the other things. And then we want to say, well, I want my child to be just like them. This speaks then to the depth of our own distorted minds and our own distorted fantasies. But it is understandable in terms of what I've said earlier to a degree. When we have been convinced that we are suffering because we are different, then it becomes understandable that we wish to end our suffering by trying not to be different, by trying to convince those who injure us and destroy us not to see us as black, even though we may be realistically black right in front of their faces. And tell them to look at us as if we are some kind of abstraction. We're not flesh and blood and dark skin and brown skin and what have you. We're not flesh and blood with our lips and our hair and so forth. We are just a man, just a person, just an American, an abstraction. We want them to act as if they're incapable of seeing color and incapable of discriminating color in the world. Ultimately, on a deeper psychological level, some of us then would hope to even merge into them and to become one with them, to no longer exist as a black people, to no longer be perceived in any distinctive way from other folk, and particularly from whites. We, in a sense then, in our pain, wish to become invisible and to commit biological and psychological suicide, to deny ourselves and to deny our identity in the hope of escape and in the hope of gaining what we perceive as the benefits of white society and European so-called civilization. This is a fantasy, as I had pointed out before, and it is a compensatory fantasy that is bound to fail. It will never be realized. And I will talk to you later about it. And even if it were, what people who have any pride in themselves, who have love for self, would want to disappear in the eyes of other people, and who would want to disappear in their own eyes? What level of self-hatred and self-alienation must exist in us that we would wish to see our lives fade away from this earth? What self-hatred and self-alienation would have us overlook reality? If you think racism is the major basis for conflict in the world, you could not be more wrong. The dream of some coffee-colored people will not end your pain. In South Africa, they got a group of coffee-colored people, and they just put them in a different category, didn't they? They called them coloreds. And so the society still stratified itself. If you know anything about genetics, it will be hundreds and thousands of years before you get a milk-colored race. In the meanwhile, you're going to still have the various shades of color, from light to dark. And knowing mankind, he will use those shades as a basis for establishing domination. And even when the shades disappear, there will exist class. There will exist culture. We have races of people today that you cannot tell apart, who still have the same genetic basis, but who still have a reason to fight and kill each other. Either reasons of religion or history or some other circumstance, reasons of class and whatever. You shall not escape pain by trying to escape into your white masters and merge into the white man. You may as well face the reality. The ultimate way of getting rid of pain is to get rid of its cause, not to hide in a state of self-deception. Fantasy is present when the individual group responds emotionally to ideas, values, and ideologies in ways which endanger his or its well-being and future survival. I'm trying to kind of give you a few measures of when you can tell when a person is caught up in a psychopathological fantasy. You see, when the individual responds emotionally and vigorously to ideas and to concepts and values and ideologies, which, if pursued, places the individual in danger, places their very survival in question, then you know that you're dealing with an individual who has been taken over and possessed by a fantasy. And therefore you have to look at people and their ideologies and look at what place their ideology puts them and judge their ideology against the reality of their circumstances. This is the kind of thing we deal with the psychologists every day. With people who come in filled with fantasies and beliefs, attached tenaciously to ideologies and hopes, and yet those fantasies, beliefs, ideologies, and hopes are depressing them, destroying their families, making it impossible for them to love, making it impossible for them to realize themselves and to achieve what their potentialities would allow them to achieve, were they not caught up in curious games, caught up in ideologies and fantasies that ultimately lead many to engage in self-destructive behavior, in various types of addictions, leads them to engage in behaviors that hurt and destroy other people, as well as hurt and destroy themselves. To a great extent, what we call neuroses in psychology is more starkly described as stupidity, where the person continues to hold on to ideas even though they get hurt over and over and over again, where on a certain level you wonder why they cannot logically see that the beliefs are not advancing their interests but actually working against their interests, and yet they continue to persist to the point sometimes of destruction or the destruction of others. So we not only recognize then that individuals can have these kind of fantasies that send them to psychiatrists and psychologists and ministers and other people, but people also can be in the throes of collective fantasies that place themselves as a people in danger and places their very life as a people in question. And believe me, ladies and gentlemen, African people the world over, African American people's lives are in question today. And the survival of African people on this globe is a serious question at this moment. If you do not believe this, then chances are you too are wrapped up in a fantasy that has cut you off from the reality of what is going on in the world. We recognize that a fantasy is present then when the subject of that fantasy adamantly believes in ideas which are obviously contradicted by reality, facts, and events. The hallmark of normality and the very foundation of being able to survive is being able to know what is real from the unreal, and being able to base one's behavior on reality, and to test one's beliefs and ideas against reality, and to readjust one's beliefs and ideas in terms of the information one gets from reality. I am not arguing against the holding on to ideals and the striving for ideals, but the striving for ideals should be clearly demarcated from what is real. And one then should not confuse the ideals for which one strives with what is in reality. For when that occurs, then one is subject to serious injury, psychologically, if not physically. Many of our people then caught up in the ideology of assimilationism have misread reality and projected a type of stupidity that is appalling, that will ultimately place us in jeopardy of our lives as people. As I said earlier, this is somewhat understanding because we have a name for this kind of phenomenon in psychology too. We call it identification with the aggressor. Love for the aggressor. Isn't it intriguing to ask why, after these centuries of enslavement, these centuries of Jim Crowism, racial discrimination, lynching, these centuries of unrelenting violence against our people physically and psychologically, these centuries of injustice and every other thing you can talk about, why is it that black folk want to be just like white folk? Why we see our ultimate goal and that of living with these people who cause us so much pain, of sending our children to school with them, of seeing their love as the final verification of our manhood and womanhood and personhood as a people. Isn't it amazing that after all of this suffering, we do not see ourselves as concretely existing and as being real and whole human beings until we are perceived and recognized by white folk? Love for the aggressor. An interesting phenomenon in psychology. We see it and we saw it in the Jewish concentration camps, whereas many Jews and certain Jews walked around in the concentration camps with Nazi armbands on, talked to their people and treated their people as if they themselves were Nazis, and became allies with their Nazi captors against the interests of their fellow prisoners. Again, of course, we are seeing people who are seeking to escape their pain and guilt and shame by trying to become one with their persecutors, who think then that if they can become one, they will escape from their persecution. This is when we're dealing with fantasies. And yet that camp did not get rescued from their pain. They were still in prison. They still helped to maintain their people in prison and work against the interests of their own people and ultimately against their own interests. We have a bunch of people here today in this country who are in a similar position. They're sitting with Clinton today. We have one that even leads the U.S. Army. And yet when we look at the reality of this gentleman, we see that his major acts have been to lead the U.S. armies against black nations. We see him writing out great plans which provide the military and other means by which the white North, the European North, shall continue to dominate the black South. A man who I dare say has not sent one military weapon to South Africa, will not provide one bit of military training for the liberation of our people anywhere in the world. A man who may be ignorant and possibly not, but I assume he is, of the fact that because you rise to head an army, a national army does not mean that you are a part of the power system. If you read back into African history and into history in general, he will recognize that he is not the first slave general of an army. Many armies have been led by slaves and even armed by slaves. So the idea that you may head an army, that you may be the top general, in no way implies that you're not a slave and that you're not set up to work against the interests of our people. Many Arabized Africans fought against other Africans to try to convince them to undertake a foreign ideology and to fall victim to foreign rulers and dominators. There is no substitute for self-sufficiency and for operating under one's own power. But people caught up in fantasy let their emotional needs for love, their emotional need for acceptance, their emotional need to be embraced by their enemies override their common sense. These people, as I pointed out in our last lecture, neglect their own self-development. They do not see the development of their minds, the development of their intellect, the development of their social relations and social organizations and social systems and power, the development of their own institutions as important and key to their liberation. They see gaining the love and acceptance of their enemies as the key to being liberated from their pain. And therefore they leave themselves in serious states of underdevelopment. Their minds atrophy. Their social institutions rarely get built or are anemic or fall apart. And they continue to languish in states and stages of dependency. This is still the way we see, and this is the reality of our people that we see today. That's one of the reasons why I've said that the great genius of African children, which I've demonstrated in the book, The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child, in Awakening the Natural Genius of Black Children, in those books I have demonstrated that black children have a natural head start. That they are not only different from white children merely by the color of their skins, but that they are born intellectually more advanced than whites. that they have greater natural capacities for learning in their childhood than whites. But these differences are overlooked. These intellectual potentialities are unfed and unmet and undeveloped by people whose minds are overridden by an emotional attachment to their enemies, who wish to deliver these children over to their enemies, even though their enemies have told them time and time again that they hate the very sight of them. That's right, brother. That they do not even want them to live next door. And they wish that they were not even existent in the world today. But we insist on placing them under the instruction of these people, and then we are surprised as to why they do not learn, and as to why they come out and destroy themselves in the thousands of ways that we see them do every day, time after time. But you see, people who want to merge, who want to lose themselves in their enemies, do not want anything black to stand up, because it would remind them of their separateness. So no matter how good a black school would be, they don't want it to exist, because they want to rid themselves of their blackness, which they think is the cause of their problem. No matter how much you talk about black economic development, they don't want that to exist, because they call that self-segregation. And they see the worst thing that could happen to them is to be separated from their white masters. And we see the people then constantly engaged in self-denial. But reality begins to creep in. Let's look at this generation after the assimilationist fantasies possessed our minds. Not that it does not still continue to possess many of our minds today. And what have we recognized as a people who tried to turn fantasy into reality? Who permitted our fantasies to blind us to reality? What have we arrived at today as a people? Have we achieved merger with our enemies? Do they not any longer see us as black people, as various types of stereotypes? Are we yet not now more segregated in the inner cities than we were before? Are we not now more segregated in our schools than we were before? Are we not now more unemployed than we were before? Are we not now populating the prisons of America much more than we were before? Are we not now much more addicted to drugs and various other injurious habits than we were before? Are we now not more subject to racial strife than we were before? Is not criminality rampant in our neighborhoods? Are not our children not learning as much as they did before? What did that fantasy gain us? What did this striving for merger with our enemies gain us? Some of us then have started to come a bit to reality. We recognize then some 40 years almost after the 1954 Supreme Court decision that the largest percentage of us are no better off and many of us are worse off than we were at that time. After a generation of assimilationist fantasies, we find ourselves as a people without an educational agenda, still stumbling around trying to find out the best methods for educating our children, still struggling with concepts of African-centered education, multicultural education, integrated education, Head Start, and all the other nefarious multitudes of programs and projects and titles and entitlements that have only left us confused and basically ignorant and left our problems unresolved. After a generation of assimilationist fantasies, we find ourselves without a cultural agenda. Who are we? Where are we? Where are we going? Where did we come from? After a generation of assimilationist fantasies, we find ourselves without an economic agenda, suffering economically. And I'm going to come back to this in a minute, because the economic situation of African people in the world today is alarming and will soon get worse. Oh yeah, there's some of you out there can point to a few Negroes who've made it up. You know, a part of fantasy is to believe in fairy tales. And one of the standard endings of fairy tales is, and they live happily ever after. So that is this great fantasy, a part of the assimilationist fantasy that said, you know, once we integrate with white folk, and once we go to school with them, and once we break down the barriers to employment and all this other kind of stuff, we will live happily ever after. And yet, you know, history did not justify this belief at all. As I've said on many occasions, people progress in history, but they also what? Regress. All of this happens in history. People may integrate in history, but they also do what? Disintegrate in history as well. Black Americans believe in the American idea of progress, that things must necessarily get better than they were before. Who told you that lie? There is no law in the universe that promises any individual or any people that things necessarily get better than they were before. We've seen nations and peoples and civilizations do what? Rise, mature, and what? Fall. We've seen literally races and ethnic groups disappear from the face of this earth. We can witness on this very continent the near decimation of the Native American. We can look at our own history, the history of the Reconstruction era, the history of the 1870s and 1880s, when blacks could vote, when blacks were elected to Senate, when blacks were elected to Congress, when blacks were parts of state legislatures, when blacks were sheriffs, when blacks headed corporations, when blacks had strong civil rights legislation. And yet, all of this was taken from us. And it took literally 100 years for black people to get the same thing back. If the law says that progress is the only thing that happened in the world, then we should not have been struggling for voting rights in the 1960s, because we had them in the 1870s. You see? We should not have been struggling for civil rights and the other things in the 1960s and 70s. We had them in the late 1860s and 70s. So our own history refutes the idea then that people live happily ever after, and that once they achieve a particular status and position in society, they are destined to maintain the position and only to go higher. We failed to learn a lesson then, as we are failing to learn the lesson now. We failed to learn the fact that laws do not protect anyone. That laws are not sacred. That laws are merely rules laid down by people who are strong enough to enforce them. And they're laid down to maintain their interests as a people against other people. And that they will make and unmake laws when it suits their interests to do so. And And yet we have a bunch of black people who sit around here thinking that because they have civil rights laws on the books, because the Supreme Court ruled in their favor at one point, because they have some other kinds of human rights organizations, that they now are protected. The law is no stronger than its enforcement. And when the enforcement of the law is left in the hands of other people, then those people, when they choose not to enforce the law, can jeopardize us as a people. Or when they choose, can reverse the law. Look at this, what is happening today with the New York Post. At one point, Murdoch is told that he has to sell the New York Post because it is against the law for a person to own two major communications media in the same market. He could not own Channel 5 and be a major person in the Fox network and own the New York Post simultaneously. He had to let one go, so he let the Post go. And now what do we hear? The very governor himself and other people who even made the law now saying that they will do what? Sweep the law aside. Why? Because it is in their interest to do so. Because they need that scandal sheet and that rag to continue to degrade African American people. They need it during the next election campaign because it does the dirty work of the New York media as a whole. So while the New York Times can pretend that it is above the fray and that it is objective, and while the Daily News can dance around, they will let the Post say all the dirty things that they dare not say. But they're all in cahoots against the empowerment of African people. And we have not learned the lesson yet, that the only thing that ultimately protects the people and protects the interests of the people is that they have the power to protect themselves and to defend themselves against the incursions of their enemies. They cannot protect themselves by depending upon the laws made by their enemies and laws enforced by their enemies. We did not learn that lesson during the 1860s, 70s, and 80s. And it appears that we have not learned that lesson during the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And therefore, we are vulnerable to suffer the same setbacks. And as a matter of fact, we may suffer even worse setbacks in the future. We must be aware then of what our reality is and look upon our history as a check against our fantasies. The placing of blacks in these high positions will no more provide for the advancement of African people. It's a major situation, by the way, and very typical of bourgeois rule. To get the average person and to get the masses to believe that their own individual advancement represents an advancement for the race. Yeah. So their promotion to particular positions means, ain't we moved forward in the world? And yet I ask people basic questions. How many nickels has the advancement of many of our bourgeois people put in your pocket? How much has the average black man and woman and the quality of life for the masses of African people been improved by the movement of one black person or 10 black persons from one good job to another? We are supposed somehow to live through these people vicariously while we starve on these streets and we go unsalaried and unemployed. And we are to believe then that the advancement of some few of us represents the advancement of the rest of us. But let's check this fantasy against reality. And we can almost see a direct relationship between the number of black elected officials and the suffering of African people. As I pointed out before, we've lamented the death of Thurgood Marshall. But I find it interesting that he got more out of the Supreme Court while he was a lawyer than when he was a justice sitting on the bench. In fact, it is sort of interesting that he sat on the bench only to watch many of his achievements rolled back by that court before which he practiced. We got a black man who was the Secretary of Health, only to see the black community be devastated by drugs and tuberculosis and AIDS and other kinds of diseases. We got a black man who became the Secretary of Housing, and at the very point he sat in the seat, homelessness plagued and devastated the black community. We see men and women sitting on our courts around the world, and we see men and women who are district attorneys in our county courthouses. And at the point where we see an increase in the district attorneys, the black district attorneys in our courthouses, we see more black men doing what? Going to jail. And as we sit more judges on the benches in various courts, we see the prisons being overrun with black men. Where is this promise then that sitting our black bourgeoisie on the courts of these cities and counties, that putting our black bourgeoisie on the seats of the U.S. Supreme Court would somehow reduce the nature of crime in our communities? We must wake up to reality. Some of us are beginning to wake up. Some evidence that some new, more healthy fantasy may be taking place is, of course, the movement of many toward the memory of Malcolm X. But I'm not all too sure. But it does indicate that some people looking at the reality of our situation and looking for perhaps a different model, a different ideology, a different way of dealing with that reality. But you see, those who are dominant rule by advancing fantasies, by promoting fantasies. The fantasies laid on African people by the NAACP, by the Urban League, and by other assimilationist organizations were funded to a great extent by whites and Europeans. And while one major group would not support our economic development and political development in the deepest sense, they themselves advanced their own political interests. And while they would not support nation building in the African community, they plunked the nation down right in the midst of the so-called Middle East. In other words, we were fed the fantasies of assimilation and integration by the same group who concerned itself with building a nation and building power so that it would no longer be dependent on the goodwill of other people, because they learned the serious lesson that sitting on the goodwill of other people may mean circumstances one day can change, and people who may not have noticed who you were or noticed that you were racially different suddenly begin to realize who you are and act on it. It becomes very instructive to recognize that at the time that the German Jews were persecuted and started to be and were being gathered up for the gas chambers, they had achieved the highest levels of integration in German society. Many of them thought that they were truly German. They identified with German culture and German ideology, German literature, and contributed to its art, to its sciences, philosophy, and so forth. And yet, the convergence of various circumstances singled them out again, and they were persecuted. So the idea here, ladies and gentlemen, that we can throw up before this community all all the things we've contributed to America, which is what I call, historical contributionism. We brag about how much we've contributed to America, how we built America, how we contributed to its arts, how we contributed to its science. And we even go back into history and say, well, we taught your great forefathers, the Greeks, civilization. That's not going to save you. That provides very little defense when for one reason or another people may decide to do so. They may say, oh yeah, you Egyptians, you were true Africans. We know that. You taught our Greek forefathers. Yes, we're aware of that. And you made great contributions on into the chamber. We'll remember you. Many people then are beginning to face this reality, but then a new fantasy has been laid on us. What I call the New Age fantasy. The New Age fantasy of multiculturalism. A warmed over assimilationist ideology. An idea that developed from what we call cultural pluralism, as defined by Christine Bennett in her book, Comprehensive Multicultural Education. Cultural pluralism is characterized by mutual appreciation and respect between two or more ethnic groups. And when we talk about the multicultural curriculum, she defines that curriculum as the curriculum develops knowledge and understandings about cultural differences and the history and the contributions of contemporary ethnic groups and nations, as well as various civilizations in the past. How does that feed you? How does that employ you? How does that protect your very lives and biological interests? This kind of knowledge, this kind of respect for other groups. It strives to integrate multi-ethnic and global perspectives into the traditional curriculum that is primarily mono-ethnic and, in the United States, Anglo-European. Another trip. We're going to dance other people's dances and sing other people's songs. And we're going to respect them and get them to respect us. That sounds very much like the assimilationist to me. And where does that get us? I go to many colleges and universities and I see black students and black people pushing multiculturalism. And I ask them, why is it that black people are pushing this? We're the most multicultural people around. We've always respected other people's culture. Any other group of people could come and go into business in our community. Any other group of people can come and live among us as a people. We have worked beside every ethnic group on this globe. We have not lynched other ethnic groups. We have not boycotted other ethnic groups. We've even tried to claim their identity. There are many of us who felt proud when somebody said, oh, I thought you were an Indian, or I thought you were a Mexican, or I thought anything but black. Black people have not rejected other people's culture. They have not made other people suffer. We eat every kind of cultural food there is on this earth. We wear every kind of cultural dress on this earth. We support every kind of cultural group on this earth. The only cultural group African people have rejected is African culture itself. And now before you can find out who you are and what you are, before you can read your own history and come into your own self-knowledge, someone is laying a curriculum on you telling you you should learn more about other people. And yet you must be aware that if you suffer from a lack of self-knowledge, a lack of self-acceptance, a lack of self-love, a lack of self-confidence, a lack of identity, I don't care how much you know about other people, I don't care how much you sing their songs and dance their dances, I don't care how much you eat their food, you still will not be right in the world, and you will still be oppressed by every other ethnic group this earth has on it today. You have to recognize that. But yet we got somebody caught up in multiculturalism. The question I ask, where is it? Where is this multiculturalism you're talking about here? Where is it? Is it in your neighborhoods? Are you living in a mixed neighborhood? Where are the multicultural grocery stores? Where are black Americans and Dominicans owning things? Where are black Americans and Koreans owning things? Where are black Americans and Arabs owning things? Where are black Americans and whites owning things? Where are they living together? Where are they sharing? Where is this multiculturalism we are talking about, ladies and gentlemen? Yes, in the colleges, in the schools, but not where? In reality. And we are being taken on a trip. And if you take a little time and check a bit of reality, you will come to recognize that at the very point multiculturalism is reaching its zenith in popularity, is at the very point where the world is literally breaking apart through what? Ethnic conflict. Every evening it serves and croaks and this one and that one. Where is this racial harmony that we're talking about? Huh? Or is it another game to be run on black folks' minds? Is it another fantasy that we'll trip on for the next 30 years while people exploit us and use us? Is it another fantasy that will have us wake up one day and have all of the other ethnic groups in this country look at us as the enemy and ultimately decide to destroy us as a people? While we were caught up in our assimilationist fantasies, we've seen every other ethnic group come now to achieve the identity as a minority in America. And those programs that we struggled so hard for and fought so hard for to advance our interests as a people, now we got to share with every other group that decides to give itself a name. All of a sudden, white women became minorities. You see. All of a sudden, immigrants became minorities. Yes, I'm going to say it. Some of you don't want to deal with it, but you got to deal with it. It's real. It's real. And I'll tell you up front, African Americans should be the first in line to get from America. Yes. And why do I say so? Because I'm immoral? No, because we paid the price. We paid the price of hundreds of years of slavery in this country. We paid the price of Jim Crowism. We paid the price of lynching. We paid the price of injustice. We paid the price of police brutality. We paid the price of unemployment. We paid the price of ignorance and miseducation. We paid the price with our blood in every theater of battle this country has ever entered into. We fought the Revolutionary War. We fought the Civil Wars. We fought the Spanish-American Wars. We fought the Indian Wars. We fought in Europe. We fought in Japan. We fought all over this earth. And consequently, it is a bill come due that we get paid in America. And it is a shame then that there are those in America who expect, after all of these sacrifices, that African Americans act as if they just got off the boat yesterday. Why don't you act like the other immigrants? We are not the other immigrants. But this is what happens when you fall prey to fantasies. You would become afraid to speak up for yourself because you want to be loved too much. You want to be accepted too much. You want to be liked in the community. You want the Korean to smile at you. Yeah. You want to see in the eyes of other ethnic groups that they don't see you as black. And just for that, you let them take all of your money out. Just for that, you'll let them starve your children in the street. Just for that, you won't even educate your own children. You won't provide them with recreational facilities. You won't provide them with employment because you want to be loved and accepted by somebody else. You're going to die looking for love and acceptance. Because the reality of the world, ladies and gentlemen, is that it is made of ethnic groups, that it is made of races. And if you believe so, it was made by God, there must be some damn purpose for it. How is it that you're made as an ethnic group and a race, and then you're made to believe that it's a blasphemy not to speak up for who and what you are as a person? And then you're made to think it is holy to deny the skin that God gave you. But you got to face up with the reality and see what is going on in this world today. And the reality is, as stated by Kopkain in his book called Tribes, born amidst optimism for the triumph of a rational and universal world order, the 20th century is ending with an increased interest in the power of race, ethnicity, and religion, rather than the long predicted universal age of the end of history. Your own Senator Moynihan now has a new book out called The Permanence of Ethnicity. Yes. Brzezinski, under the Carter administration, talks about the pandemonium, ethnicity. You got to face the reality. Race ain't going away in your lifetime, nor in your children's lifetime, nor in their other children's lifetime. This is the reality that you have to accept and deal with. It's not going anywhere. Beyond such visions, he goes on to say, lies the emergence of another kind of tribalism, one forged by globally dispersed ethnic groups. And he talks about these various tribes and how they advance economically. Let's look at some things that are going on while we are caught up in multiculturalism and racial harmony, another joke. It's not that I don't want harmony between races. You see? It's not that. But you got to ask, what price are you willing to pay for harmony? Are you willing to pay the harmony of the grave? Oh yes, the others would be harmonious with us as long as we remain consumers. As long as we remain non-competitive. As long as we remain dependent and beggarly. As long as we don't demand our just due. Then we can talk about how we get along. And yet I'm afraid this is the kind of harmony that people are talking about. Let's look at what is actually going on in our real world while we're talking about harmony and love between the sisters and the brothers all over this world. Now take you through a quick trip. I know we got to go here, but I just want to take a couple of things here because it's important, like I say, if you're going to remain sane, to look at what is really going on. As I said earlier, where are the multicultural businesses? Where are the multicultural jobs? Now I picked up this paper this weekend, one of those free paper called Manhattan Spirit. And it has on it, it says it's the West Side's largest weekly newspaper. Heroin makes the grade in Ivy League as Upper West Side campus experiences new drug problem. Well, they're talking about the students at Columbia who catching on to the heroin habit. Not hard over there. As a matter of fact, they call it Columbia's dark secret. Okay. Yeah. What I find interesting, by the way, but one of the things I caught here was a segment taken out by the Koreans, what they call it, Korean America, a New York story, page 20 to 25. So we took out about 5 pages of ads here. And let's see, they're talking about various things. Let me just read you a few quotes. Here they talk about a new publication targets Asian American youth. Multicultural youth, did they say? Asian American youth. A new monthly hailing a new age for Asian American youth has reached a newsstand near you. The new second generation, that's the name of it, which made its debut last November, has created a forum of communication for young Asian Americans aimed at giving a voice to a sector of our society whose numbers are rapidly increasing, but whose needs and interests are chronically underrepresented. Where's the multiculturalism here? Where's the assimilationism here? Huh? At a time when the needs and ambitions of, this is a quote of the editor here, at a time when the needs and ambitions of Asian Americans are being redefined, our goal is to play an active role in the shaping of the Asian identity. Are we talking about becoming invisible? We're talking about merging, you know, and the kind of thing here. The 1990 census reported that the Asian population in the United States increased 100% in the last decade, now numbering 7.3 million. Okay, another recent study revealed that 33% of the Asian population holds college degrees, as opposed to the national average of 16%. And I've got news for you. The most recent set of Asian immigrants into this country have as high as 46% of people with college degrees. Compare that then with something like 13% for black folk. You can begin to see what is going on here. You're being lulled to sleep in multiculturalism. It goes on here, and, but I'll skip over that for a bit, and I just want to look at something else here. Down at the bottom called Association Unites Community. Korean Americans have prospered so impressively in New York City because of their cohesion as a community. Multiculturalism here, ladies and gentlemen? Denying color? Denying identity? No. But this is the age of multiculturalism, isn't it? Yeah. And the Korean Association of Greater New York has nurtured this unity in the metropolitan area for over 30 years. They're nurturing unity, and we're trying to nurture something else. Their major organization bringing cohesion, and ours is trying to disperse us throughout the American population. The longevity and success of the association is due in part to its effort to constantly adjust its mission as the needs of the Korean community mature. Now that Korean Americans have achieved social stability and economic prosperity, the Korean Association is looking to help improve relations between Korean New Yorkers and other ethnic minorities in the city. There's your multiculturalism. We're going to be nice to you after we get all the money. And after we stabilize ourselves and stabilize our community, then we're going to deal with the ethnic relations. It's a lesson. And this is what we've been trying to tell black folk all the time. Why are you trying to integrate and love other people and get caught up in it when your greatest problem is to do what? Integrate with yourself and love yourself first. And the greatest bit of multiculturalism will come from the fact that once you become a cohesive, integrated ethnic group, you can deal with other ethnic groups from a position of what? Power. Yes, strength. You have something to trade. You have something to sell. You have something to buy. You have something then that demands their respect without you having to march and do all of the kinds of things that we see ourselves doing today. And every other group knows this is the way you do it. You stabilize yourself, you build yourself, and then you reach out. To live harmoniously with other ethnic groups, we need to reach out and cooperate one with the other. But we notice this is coming after what? 30 years of economic development. But a good deal of what we call multiculturalism is merely a new face put on advertising. You say, well, we recognize that other groups exist in the world. We want to sell them things. This is chiefly the way whites approach it. We want, to them to feel comfortable buying things from us. So we're going to talk about diversity a little bit. Today, the Korean Association serves as an umbrella group for over 1,000 Korean and non-Korean organizations throughout the 5 boroughs. It is widely recognized as the leader of Korean American organization, with this president duly elected by Korean American voters from the entire metropolitan area. How many people know the Koreans went to the polls to elect their own leader? I know, we were so busy trying to run for president with Jesse Jackson until we didn't recognize that. And I've said often that Jesse Jackson would have been a much more powerful man if he'd run for election within the black community and served as an elected official of the black community representing the black community's interests, rather than trying to run in some general election. He could literally have led the so-called third world had he led the black community and identified with it and integrated with it and been legitimated by it. You say, because this is what groups do, who are real in the world. And it goes on here. Now they're getting ready here, let's see, to deal with what they call charities. See, here we come, right, when it comes to the charity part. They're going to give us some turkeys. Now it starts with green grocers produce results. Over the past 20 years, there has been a highly visible metamorphosis in New York's produce industry. We don't have to know that, do we? During that period, as any New Yorker could tell you, Korean Americans have come to dominate the retail end of the business. And I'm just skipping over here. At the center of this revolution is the Korean. Did I say multicultural? Did I say racial harmony? No, I said what? Korean. Ethnic identity. The Korean Produce Association. Did I say the All Races Produce Association? No, it says right. The Korean Produce Association. Oh, but this is the age of racial harmony and multiculturalism, isn't it? Located in the Hunts Point market, which I predict they will take over in the near future. The association was founded 20 years ago to help new merchants with the various problems associated with owning a retail business in New York City. Same kind of thing that I'm trying to get black people to recognize here today. People must be directly instructed about how to do things. Why is it that in tandem with the number of degrees in business administration, black people have fewer businesses to administrate? And the more degrees in business administration, master degrees, MBAs and so forth, we've gotten, the less we've come to own our communities as a people. It must mean then that those degrees are not designed for African Americans to own their own economic situation or their own communities. Those degrees, like all the other degrees, are designed to make us high-priced servants for our masters, to own nothing and to control nothing. Get them so that we can serve other people in the exploitation of our own people. No amount of going to college and getting a BA in business administration is going to tell you directly how to run a grocery store out here on this street. Because it's not designed that way. And the thing that I'm trying to get people to understand here, we need to put out these publications that say directly how to own a grocery store. Yeah. 1, 2, 3. Where's the wholesale market How do you rent? How do you do such and such a thing? This is the kind of instruction in business we need, not some kind of lollygag theory and a lot of doggone accounting, but direct information about how to do what is real. Not something feeding a bourgeois fantasy, but something that actually feeds the people. And yet this is what other groups do. There are two curricula in this world. There's the formal curriculum in the schools, and there's the curriculum that takes place in the homes and in the businesses and in the streets of an ethnic group. And it's the ones that take place in the streets and in the homes and so forth that's the real one, not the ones in the schools. You see? And when we talk about African-centered education, you see, you can begin to see why African-centered education differs fundamentally from many other forms of education, because it looks at the problems we have to solve. I guess my time is running out here. So I'll wrap it up. But I just want to point out a couple other things here. It was founded 20 years ago to help the new merchants with the various problems associated with owning a retail business in New York City. Starting with only 30 members, the association has expanded to over 1,000. A key element of that strategy has been to share ideas and concepts which led to the revitalization of their industry. Not being educated for whom? Other folk. Not being educated to solve who's problem. Other folks' problem, but whose? Their problem. But the Negro thinks he is really being educated when he can tell other ethnic groups how to solve their problem, but he can't solve his own. In fact, that's why he goes to school, to solve other people's problems. And he's called brilliant and smart when he can solve other people's problems, but he cannot use his own intelligence to resolve his own community's problems. The association also guides members through the gauntlet of problems they frequently encounter when operating in a foreign business culture. Interesting. I've talked about people for years. You must see this business culture and the American business culture as a white culture. Stop talking about standard business practice. These are white folks' business practices. Designed to meet their needs based on their history and their experience. And when you practice them, if you practice their practices, you can only do what? Support them. There's no such thing as a standard business practice. There's no such thing as I've said before, as standard education. You understand? There's an education that meets your needs. There's an education that advances your interests. There's education based on your history, based on your psychology, based on your values, based on your goals, which are not the same as other people's history, psychology, and goals. And therefore, when you get an education that is not fitted to your own realities, it is going to work against you and destroy you. But this kind of lack of knowledge is hidden behind the concept standard education, standard business practices. No such animal. They didn't come to learn standard education, standard business practices. They practiced the kind of business that was relevant to their own reality as a people, relevant to their history and their psychology and their culture and their tradition. And it worked. But those of us pretending to be white, acting like white, have only succeeded in maintaining our separation and degradation as a people. I told people years ago, there's no such thing as a black bank, but you went on over there and you built up Freedom National to get yourself and sold it. And every year it sat on that street. For every year it sat on that street, we got additional non-black businesses on it. And yet you were deceived into thinking that that bank sitting on that street would advance black economic interests. It could not. If you look at the reality of the American economic system, if you came to understand the nature of the American banking system, and if you came to understand the nature of our economic situation, you would recognize that a commercial federal bank is the most inappropriate institution for advancing a group's economic interests. You put your monies in there and financed the moving of jobs out of New York City. You put your money in these banks and you finance building of highways and sewers and suburbs and moving jobs and factories into the South or out of the country completely. Let me tell you, because the bank just doesn't hold your money. It must invest the money. It must lend the money. And what does it do? If there are no businesses in your own community to which a bank can lend money, then it has to invest its funds into someone else's businesses and someone else's assets. Yes, we're bringing it in here. Which means then the African American community, because it misunderstood its own economic reality, supported the reality of other people and led to its downfall. I just want to quote one more thing here so we can begin to get some sense of what we're dealing with, and I'll be through it right after this one. New York Times, March 22nd, 1993. You know, I talk about education. This society can only brag about how it has freedom of information because it has succeeded in destroying black people's minds. Here's a society that does not want to hide what it does to various people, and it doesn't. Every means by which it manipulates and controls and dominates is published right in front of your eyes. That's why our children cannot learn to read and must not learn to read. Because you know, ladies and gentlemen, if black people really learn to read well and acted on the knowledge that's available to us, you would get censorship in America. They would hide knowledge from you. The only way then that this country does not hide knowledge from us, it makes sure that we take no interest in reading, that we run from books, we run from papers, we run from libraries. We see reading as unmanly. You see, we get headaches when we read. We get sleepy. We see it almost as un-African. We start even making excuses for ourselves. Our thought is non-linear. While there's we got a lot of that stuff too. People hiding things. We are intuitive people. Yeah, right. Just means you don't want to do the hard work of reading and thinking. You want to sit around and guesstimate and estimate and all these other things instead of grasping onto reality and being precise in what you're doing. Seeking new ties and clout, Korean Grocers Journal Voices, the Korean Grocers Association of New York had a surprising guest give the invocation at its annual awards meeting last month, the Reverend Al Sharpton. Not only that, they have also sponsored spots on black radio stations honoring heroes like Thurgood Marshall. The Korean Produce Association ran a scholarship program for black minority students in conjunction with the Amsterdam News. Got a picture right here. They're sending 2 colored girls to Korea over there. President of the Korean Association of Greater New York provides last-minute tips on life in Seoul, Korea. Provide tips on life in America, man, to 3 young students, black people. Sit here. Merrill Griffith, Elizabeth Ortiz, and Duana Evans, shortly before they left earlier this month for studies in the Asian capital under a scholarship program established 2 years ago by Kyung-hee University for African American students. A total of 100 scholarships were given to studies on the undergraduate and graduate levels. Under the arrangement, students are to be sit in groups of 20 over a 5-year period. Come on. Come on. Typical neo-colonial game, typical brainwashing game, and how cheaply we can be bought as a people. Giving away millions and billions of dollars for a few stupid scholarships, and for some people who are going to come back and convince us that it's in our interest to support people who exploit us. Yes. And I see them buying the Amsterdam News. Almost every week there's some scholarship being handed out to black students. On a range of issues, Korean business owners in New York are using the strength of their numbers to try to increase their political influence and improve their business opportunities. And perhaps most important, mend their bitter relations with other ethnic groups. Told me years ago, what do you do first? You get the economic together first. There's no power without economic power. Negroes thought power was in voting. Power is not in voting. Power is in money. Power always having control over major resources. And any ethnic group that's smart gets this first, and then it moves into the political arena, not the other way around. Yes. And the grocers have elicited municipal help to set up a huge new food co-op to cut their costs drastically. Who are they going to sell the food to, huh? Community relations initiatives by them and others have included taking black leaders on tours of South Korea and sending black students to study there. And now they're going to push their concern by voting as a bloc in this year's mayoral race. They've made a collective response, and they're going here. The organization is trying now. You were complaining so much that it wasn't that the Koreans were taking livelihood and taking your money out of the community, not living, not sharing, but just coming in today and taking the money out. You know what our complaint was? They don't smile at you when you come in. They look like they're mad. And they learned that all black people need is a smile. They give you every number and nickel in their pocket. They'll rob their own children of a livelihood. They'll starve them. They won't keep their money to educate their children, even though they complain about it. Smile at them. Say hello. And they'll just lay it on you. The organizations now are trying to change the behavior of Korean business people so that they are less likely to spur a negative response. This has been done partly through extensive advertising in New York's 4 daily Korean newspapers and 3 cable television channels. And seminars are being offered to teach Koreans to smile more frequently, something they say is rare in their culture. Boy, what a smile will do for you, huh? Their total sales approach 1.5 billion. It's thus hardly surprising that the giants of the food industry, from Anheuser-Busch to General Mills, streamed to the association's 2nd annual food and trade show. Did they say multicultural show? No, last month. The Grocers Association, they give a little history to Koreans who remain in the food business, and they go on here and they talk about, now what are they getting ready to do? Now they got clout, fighting sidewalk competition. Okay? Yes. These competitors have more than any other issue. It is peddling that is energizing Korean store owners to register and vote. Their goal is to drive the city to crack down on illegal vendors and more tightly regulate legal ones. Black men pushed into the street, kept into the street. And now we get a group of people who rise up on the black man's money, and what thanks do we get? We turn around now and he's going to use his clout to run them off the street. But of course, how can they not consider us fools anyway? People who went and fought in Korea and died in Korea, whose blood was shed in Korea, whose blood will still be shed in Korea tomorrow, if the North Koreans decide to attack or the Chinese decide to attack. And while we were dying and fighting for them, they could have come over and enjoyed the privileges that we could not even enjoy at the time. And while our monies and our tax monies and so forth were going to protect this peninsula, going to make this peninsula a safe place for the white boys to invest in so that they could get rich. While black tax money was going to Korea to build highways and infrastructure, while black money was going to invest in the building of industries and the stabilizing of governments, something that the United States never did for African nations of African people, even though it was filled with African people on its very soil. We are dealing here then with the people who should have come here and given you thanks for the sacrifices that you made in protecting their lives and ensuring their freedom. And yet what we get a bunch of black folk who believe that they owe the Koreans a living and who support their becoming wealthy so that they can turn right around and run even the vendors off the blocks of New York City. This is because people believe in fantasies and will not deal with reality. Ladies and gentlemen, racial identity is not a joke. It's not a thing. It's not just a custom. Identity is the source of a people's survival. It is the key to people's survival, because identity is the basis upon which they organize themselves. They act in unison and act as a collective. It is a means by which they share one with the other and structure their relationships in such a way that they enhance their living and they protect their very lives. And I'm telling you today, then, ladies and gentlemen, in this age of multiculturalism and racial harmony, that if the black man does not reestablish his identity, and then if the black man reclaims his identity as an African man, an African woman, unless we reclaim African consciousness and identity, our days on this earth are not long. Thank you kindly for your attention.
A hand for Brother Amos. Right now we're going to take a collection for our speaker like we do every week. So whatever you give, will you please hold the money between your palms?
Okay. You ready? You're going to be still? And whatever your collection is, you hold it between your two hands and repeat. Divine love through me. Blesses and increases. All that I give. And all that I receive. Okay? And just think about that sometimes. And know that everything is flowing. It's not only going up, it's flowing back.
You know, a brother like Amos Wilson, he got so much information, you can't get it all out in 2 hours or 3 hours. You know, this brother could speak for 4 to 5 hours, you know. So we are thankful that he came and blessed us with his knowledge that he showered upon us. We usually get question and answer, but it's running late. And this is not our place, but we have to abide by the rules and regulations of this place. So we thank you for coming out. Baba Justice will be here next Tuesday. And bring someone with you. Thank you.